The doctors called it a kill box, a 3-foot radius around the dying man that no one could enter. Not the surgeons, not the MPs, not even the SWAT team, aiming their rifles at the center of the trauma bay. In the middle of that circle lay Lieutenant Commander Ryan Holloway, a Navy SEAL bleeding out from 3 gunshot wounds. Standing over him, snarling with the ferocity of a wolf protecting its cub, was Gunner, a 100-pound Belgian Malinois with titanium-capped canines. The dog was ready to rip the throat out of anyone who tried to touch his handler. The clock was ticking. Ryan had minutes left, and the only person who could save him wasn't the chief of surgery or the base commander. It was Sarah Bennett, a 23-year-old rookie nurse on her 2nd week, who knew a secret that wasn't in any medical textbook. The call came in at 02 during a thunderstorm that battered the windows of Mercy General's Trauma Center in San Diego. The red phone at the nurses' station, the direct line to the Naval Air Station, didn't just ring, it screamed. Dr. Leonard Sterling, the attending trauma surgeon, slammed the receiver down, his face pale. "We have an inbound Black Hawk, 5 minutes out, high-value target, multiple GSWs to the chest and abdomen, massive hemorrhage." Sarah Bennett, a rookie nurse who had only been on the night shift for 9 days, felt the blood drain from her face. She was restocking saline bags, trying to stay out of the way of the seasoned veterans. Mercy General was the primary overflow for military personnel when the base hospital was overwhelmed, but a direct Black Hawk landing was rare. It meant the situation was catastrophic. "Prep Trauma 1, Sterling barked. "Get blood on the rapid infuser. O negative, uncross-matched. I want 6 units now." The ER exploded into chaotic efficiency. Nurses were running, machines were beeping, and the distinct thumping rhythm of rotor blades began to vibrate the very foundations of the building. Sarah rushed to the trauma bay, her hands shaking slightly as she snapped on blue nitrile gloves. "What can I do, Doctor?" Sterling didn't even look at her. "Stay against the wall, Bennett. Don't get in the way. Observe and hand me what I ask for. Do not freeze." The helicopter touched down on the roof pad with a deafening roar. Moments later, the elevator doors at the end of the trauma corridor blasted open. It wasn't a standard patient transfer. It was a war zone, moving indoors. 2 military paramedics were sprinting alongside the gurney, shouting vitals, but their voices were drowned out by a sound that made every person in the hallway freeze. It was a guttural, terrifying snarl, a sound of pure, primal aggression. "Clear the hall! Clear the damn hall!" one of the paramedics screamed, his face streaked with mud and grease. On top of the gurney, straddling the unconscious, blood-soaked body of a massive man in tactical gear, was a dog. It wasn't a pet. It was a weapon of war. A Belgian Malinois, fur matted with blood that wasn't its own, eyes wild and dilated, snapping at the air. The dog was strapped to the soldier's vest via a tactical harness, and it was panicking. "Get that animal out of here!" Dr. Sterling shouted as they wheeled the gurney into Trauma 1. "We can't!" the paramedic yelled back, sweat pouring down his face. The handler went unconscious before he could give the "stand down" command. "The dog thinks we're attacking him. He bit the flight medic. We can't get close enough to cut the harness." The scene inside Trauma 1 was a nightmare. The soldier, a man later identified as Lieutenant Commander Ryan "Wolf" Holloway, was ghostly pale. His tactical vest had been cut open, revealing soak-through bandages on his chest. But every time Dr. Sterling or the nurses stepped toward the table, the dog, Gunner, lunged. The snap of the dog's jaws was like a gunshot. "Back off!" The paramedic shoved a resident surgeon back, just as Gunner's teeth grazed the doctor's scrub top. "He's bleeding out!" Sterling roared, throwing his clipboard against the wall. "Security! Get security down here now. I need that dog tranquilized or shot. You can't shoot him, the paramedic argued, shielding the dog with his own body for a split second. That's a multi-million-dollar asset and a decorated seal. The bullet could pass through and hit the commander. Sarah stood pressed against the back wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. She watched the dog. Most people saw a monster. Sarah saw something else. She saw the whites of the animal's eyes. She saw the way its rear legs were trembling. Gunnar wasn't just aggressive, he was terrified. He could smell the blood of his master, his alpha. He knew his person was dying, and in his confused high-drive state, he believed the doctors with their bright lights and metal instruments were the ones killing him. 2 hospital security guards rushed in, hands on their tasers. "Don't tase him!" the paramedic screamed. "He'll clamp down. If he clamps on the commander's throat or arm, he'll tear the artery." It was a standoff, a deadlock, and in the center, Ryan Holloway's heart monitor began to change tone. The rapid beeping was slowing down, not stabilizing, failing. Beep, beep, beep. BP is 60/40, a nurse shouted from the monitor station. "He's crashing, doctor." "I can't work on him if I can't touch him," Sterling yelled, his face red with frustration. He looked at the security guard. "Shoot the dog. Do it. 1 clean shot to the head. Do it now." The guard drew his sidearm, his hand shaking. The room fell into a terrified silence. The dog stopped snarling for a microsecond, sensing the shift in the room's energy. He lowered his head over Holloway's chest, covering the wounded man's heart with his own skull. "Wait!" The voice was soft, but it cut through the panic like a scalpel. Every head turned. Sarah Bennett stepped away from the wall. She pulled her mask down, revealing a face that was pale but set with a strange, intense determination. "Bennett, get back," Sterling warned. "Don't shoot him," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. She walked toward the kill box. "Nurse, are you insane?" the security guard shouted, aiming the gun. "Step back." "He's not attacking," Sarah said, her eyes locked on the dog. "He's guarding. There's a difference." "He nearly took my arm off," the flight medic spat. Sarah ignored them. She knew something they didn't. She knew because she hadn't always been Sarah Bennett, the rookie nurse from Ohio. Years ago, before nursing school, before the name change and the quiet life, she had been someone else. She had grown up in the shadow of Fort Bragg, the daughter of Master Sergeant Thomas Iron Miller, a legendary K-9 trainer for Tier 1 assets. She had spent her childhood in the kennels. She knew the language of working dogs better than she knew English, but more importantly, she knew the creed. She stepped past the sterile line. The dog let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated in Sarah's own chest. He bared his teeth, the titanium caps glinting under the surgical lights. "Bennett, if you take one more step, you're fired," Sterling said, his voice low and deadly. "And then you're going to get mauled." Sarah didn't stop. She stopped 3 feet from the gurney. She didn't look at the dog's eyes. That was a challenge. She looked at his ear position, pinned back. Fear. She took a deep breath, dropped her shoulders to show submission, and then she did the unthinkable. She knelt down. She put herself at eye level with the beast. "Sarah, don't," a fellow nurse whispered, tears in her eyes. Sarah closed her eyes for a second, remembering the dusty training grounds of North Carolina, remembering her father's voice. "There is a code, Sarah, a language these dogs know. It's not sit, stay, or heel. It's the language of the pack." She opened her eyes and looked at the dog. She didn't shout. She whispered. But in the silence of the trauma bay, it sounded like a shout. "Nachtjäger, Ruhe. Night Hunter, Rest." The dog's ears twitched. The growl hitched in his throat. Sarah took a slow breath and spoke the words that no civilian should have known. It wasn't German commands. It was the unit motto, the specific, classified phrase used by the K9 handlers of Holloway's specific squadron to initiate a bond transfer in the event of a handler's death. She leaned forward, exposing her neck to the dog, and whispered, "The shepherd watches the night, so the flock may sleep." The effect was instantaneous and shocking. The tension in the room was so thick it felt like physical pressure against the eardrums. Dr. Sterling held his breath. The security guard's finger hovered over the trigger. Gunnar, the lethal machine of muscle and instinct, froze. The wild, dilated look in his eyes vanished, replaced by a sharp, confused intelligence. He cocked his head to the side, looking at this small woman in blue scrubs. He knew those words. He had heard them only twice before. Once when he was a puppy, being selected by the program. And once, every night, whispered by the man bleeding beneath him before they went to sleep in the mud of some foreign land. The shepherd watches the night. It was the all clear. It was the signal that the watch was over. It was the signal that a new sentry had arrived. Sarah slowly extended her hand. Not palm down, which was dominant, but palm up, vulnerable. "Check off, Gunnar," she whispered, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "Check off. I have the watch." The dog let out a long, shuddering exhale that sounded almost like a whimper. Slowly, agonizingly, he uncoiled his muscles. He looked down at Ryan Holloway's unconscious face, licked the blood from the soldier's cheek once, and then gingerly stepped off the chest. He didn't jump down to the floor. He stepped onto the rolling stool Sarah had kicked toward him. He sat there, trembling, his eyes locked on Sarah. "Secure him," Sarah said softly, not breaking eye contact with the dog. "Someone please, gently leash him. Do not pull." The flight medic, stunned, moved forward slowly and clipped a lead onto the dog's collar. Gunnar didn't resist. He slumped, his energy spent. "Code Blue, we're losing him," Sterling shouted, the spell breaking instantly. "Get in here. Crack the chest. We need a thoracotomy now." The room exploded into motion again. This time, Sarah was shoved aside, back into her role as the rookie nobody. Dr. Sterling was calling for scalpels, suction, and clamps. "Bennett, get that dog out of my OR!" Sterling yelled over the noise of the suction machine. Sarah grabbed the leash from the medic. "Come on, Gunnar," she murmured. "Heel." The dog pressed his body against her leg, a heavy, warm weight. He wouldn't leave the room, but he allowed her to guide him into the corner, away from the sterile field. As the surgeons cut into Ryan Holloway's chest, Sarah sat on the cold floor in the corner of the trauma bay. She wrapped her arms around the dog's massive neck. Gunnar buried his muzzle into her scrub top and let out a high-pitched whine. She felt the warm wetness of the dog's tears, or maybe they were hers, soaking her shoulder. She watched the monitors. Please live, she thought, staring at the face of the man she had never met, yet somehow knew. I didn't just save you from your dog. I saved the dog from a bullet. Don't make that be for nothing. The surgery was brutal. For 3 hours they fought to stitch up the damage done by an AK-47 round that had shattered a rib and nicked the liver, and another that had lodged near the spine. Throughout it all, the hospital administrators came down. The chief of medicine, Dr. Aris Thorne, stormed into the observation deck. "Why is there a canine in the operating theatre?" Thorne demanded over the intercom. "It's a working dog, sir," Sterling replied without looking up from the open chest cavity. "Nurse Bennett claims she has it under control. If we move the dog, he goes berserk. If he goes berserk, we can't operate. Bennett is the only thing keeping the animal sedated without drugs." Thorne looked down at the corner of the room. He saw the rookie nurse, covered in blood that wasn't hers, rocking back and forth, whispering into the ear of a dog that looked capable of killing a lion. "Who is she?" Thorne asked the charge nurse next to him. "Sarah Bennett, new hire, quiet, keeps to herself." "Doesn't look quiet to me," Thorne muttered. "Run a background check. Deeper than the HR one. Nobody calms a SEAL K9 with a whisper unless they have history." Down in the OR, the monitor finally stabilized. "Bleeding controlled," Sterling exhaled, dropping a bloody lap sponge into a bucket. "Vitals are holding. Close him up." He looked over at the corner. "Bennett." Sarah looked up, her eyes tired. "Yes, doctor?" "He's alive," Sterling said, his voice softer than usual. "You can tell your friend there." Sarah looked at Gunnar. "Did you hear that, buddy? He made it." Gunnar didn't move. He kept his eyes on the intubated man on the table, but his tail gave a single, distinct thump against the floor. 3 days passed. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Holloway was in the ICU, heavily sedated, hooked up to a ventilator. He was stable, but critical. The story of the dog whisperer nurse had spread through the hospital like wildfire. Everyone wanted to see the rookie who had stared down a K9. But Sarah avoided the break room. She avoided the praise. She focused on her charts and her rounds. She had a secret, and she was terrified it was about to come out. Gunnar had been moved to a secure kennel at the nearby naval base, handled by a specialist who had come down from Virginia. But before they took him, the dog had refused to leave Sarah's side until she gave him the command. It was a bond that shouldn't exist. On the 4th night, Sarah was assigned to the ICU, Ryan Holloway's room. It was 3:00 a.m. The hospital was quiet, save for the rhythmic whoosh hiss of ventilators. Sarah entered room 402 to check Holloway's vitals. He was a striking man, even under the wires and tubes, jaw square, scars mapping a history of violence across his arms and neck. She checked his IV drip, adjusted his blanket. "You're a long way from home, Commander," she whispered to the sleeping man. She noticed a personal effects bag on the counter. Usually these were locked up, but for special forces, protocol was sometimes loose. A worn leather journal was sticking out. Sarah knew she shouldn't touch it. It was a violation of privacy. But she felt a magnetic pull. She needed to know if he was who she thought he was. She opened the cover. Inside, there was a photo taped to the first page. It was a group of 4 men in desert camo standing in front of a dusty Humvee. They were smiling, young, invincible. On the far right was Ryan Holloway. On the far left was a man Sarah knew better than anyone in the world. Her brother, Michael Miller, the man who had died in a training accident 4 years ago. The military had sent a flag and a letter, but no details, just died in service of his country. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a sob. She traced her brother's face in the photo. Under the photo, in messy handwriting, was a caption, Team 6, the Pack, Brothers in Blood, and below that, a list of names, Wolf, Holloway, Iron, Miller, Ghost, Vargas, Viper, O'Neill. Sarah felt the room spin. Ryan Holloway wasn't just a random SEAL. He was Wolf. He was the man her brother had written about in his letters, the letters he sent home before the blackout. Michael had written, "If anything happens to me, Wolf will look out for you. He's the only one I trust with the code." Sarah had thought it was just soldier talk. She didn't know the code was literal. She didn't know her father's old training commands were the secret language of her brother's unit. "You knew him," she whispered, looking at Holloway's sleeping face. "You were there when he died." Suddenly the heart monitor spiked. Beep, 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 beep. Sarah dropped the journal. Holloway's eyes were open. They weren't groggy. They were wide, alert, and terrified. He was fighting the ventilator, gagging on the tube. "Commander, calm down." Sarah rushed to the bedside. "You're in the hospital. You're safe. Don't fight the tube." He thrashed, his hand shooting out to grab her wrist with a grip like iron. He was panicking, stuck in a flashback. Sarah tried to pull away, but he was too strong. His eyes were wild, looking through her, seeing an enemy. She needed to break the panic loop. She needed to reach him the same way she reached Gunnar. She leaned in close to his ear, ignoring the pain in her wrist. "Ryan, Wolf!" she said sharply. He didn't stop. She switched to the whisper, "The one from the trauma bay." "The shepherd watches the night." Ryan froze. His eyes locked onto hers. The panic didn't leave, but the aggression did. He stared at her, confusion warring with the drugs in his system. He blinked once. Slowly. Sarah nodded. "I'm going to take the restraints off, but you have to promise not to pull the tube. Squeeze my hand, if you understand." He squeezed. Hard. She exhaled. "Okay, you're safe." But as she checked his vitals, she saw him staring at her name tag. S. Bennett. He frowned around the tube. He shook his head slightly. He pointed a trembling finger at the journal on the counter. Then at her. He knew. He didn't know who she was, but he knew she shouldn't know that code. That code was for the dead and the brothers who survived them. The door to the ICU room opened. It was Dr. Sterling, accompanied by two men in dark suits who didn't look like doctors. They looked like government agents. "Nurse Bennett," Sterling said, his voice tight. "Step away from the patient." Sarah let go of Ryan's hand. He woke up. He was fighting the vent, but I calmed him. "We'll take it from here," one of the suits said. He had cold, grey eyes. "We need to debrief the commander immediately, and we need to have a word with you, Ms. Bennett. Or should I say, Ms. Miller?" Sarah's blood ran cold. "We ran the prints from your employee file," the agent said, stepping into the room. "Sarah Miller, daughter of Thomas Miller, sister of Michael Miller. You've gone to great lengths to hide your identity, Sarah. Why?" Ryan Holloway, still intubated, tried to sit up, the alarms on his monitor blaring again. He was glaring at the agents, trying to protect her. "Easy, Commander," the agent said, not looking at him. "We're just tying up loose ends. Your mission had a leak. We're trying to figure out if the leak is the nurse standing right here." The room they took Sarah to wasn't an interrogation cell. It was the hospital administrator's office, repurposed into a command post. The blinds were drawn, casting long, Venetian-striped shadows across the mahogany desk. Dr. Thorne had been asked to leave. Agent Silas Graves sat on the edge of the desk, cleaning his fingernails with a small, serrated knife. He was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. Grey suit, grey hair, grey eyes, and a soul that had likely turned grey decades ago. "Sit," Graves said, not looking up. Sarah sat in the plush leather chair. She didn't tremble. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by the cold, hard resolve she had inherited from Thomas Miller. "You're not a nurse," Graves said, finally snapping the knife shut. "Well, you are a nurse. You're actually a very good one. Top of your class at Johns Hopkins. But that's just the paint on the house, isn't it? The foundation is pure special warfare." "I'm a nurse," Sarah said, her voice steady. "I save lives, that's all." "You're Sarah Miller," Graves corrected. "Daughter of Thomas Iron Miller, the man who wrote the book on K9 tactical integration, the man who created the Alpha Protocol." He leaned forward. "And the sister of Michael Miller, a man who died betraying his country." Sarah stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That's a lie. Michael was a patriot. He died in a training accident." Graves laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. Is that what they told you? A chute failure? A rigged explosive? No, Miss Miller. Your brother was selling unit secrets. He was selling the identity of deep cover operatives, and we think you're finishing his work. I haven't spoken to Michael in 4 years. I changed my name to get away from people like you, to get away from the life that killed my family. And yet, Graves whispered, standing up and walking around the desk to loom over her, you knew the code. The shepherd watches the night. That phrase is classified, top secret, SCI. It is spoken only by members of the Red Squadron K-9 unit. How did you know it? Did Michael teach you? Did he tell you to wait for a wounded SEAL and finish the job? I saved his life, Sarah shouted. I stopped the dog so the surgeons could operate. If I wanted him dead, I would have let Gunner tear the throat out of Dr. Sterling and let Holloway bleed out on the table. Or maybe you wanted him alive to extract the location of the cache, Graves countered, the missing intel. The door opened. It wasn't a knock, it was a breach. Dr. Sterling stood there, looking furious, but behind him was a wheelchair. And in the wheelchair, looking like death warmed over, but sitting upright with sheer willpower, was Ryan Holloway. He was hooked to a portable oxygen tank, and 2 IV poles were being pushed by a terrified junior nurse. "Commander, you cannot be up," Sterling was saying, but Ryan ignored him. Ryan wheeled himself into the room. He looked at Graves. "Get out," Ryan rasped. His voice was like gravel grinding on glass. Graves straightened his tie. "Commander Holloway, you're compromised. We are conducting a counterintelligence inquiry." "I said," Ryan coughed, wincing as the stitches in his chest pulled. "Get out. She's not the leak." "How do you know?" Graves challenged. "She's a Miller." "She's the reason I'm here," Ryan said, staring at Sarah with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "I was coming to San Diego to find her. I was coming to tell her the truth." Graves paused. The dynamic in the room shifted. "What truth?" Ryan tapped the arm of his wheelchair. "That Michael Miller didn't betray us. He was the only one who didn't turn." Sarah felt the floor drop out from under her. She grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. "Explain," Graves commanded. "Not to you," Ryan spat. "You're DIA. This is Navy business. I want a secure line to the Admiral. Until then, Nurse Bennett, Miss Miller, stays with me. Under my protection. Gunner's protection." Graves stared at the wounded SEAL for a long, tense moment. He knew he couldn't push a Tier 1 operator who had just woken up from a coma, especially not in a civilian hospital with witnesses. "Fine," Graves said, sliding his knife back into his pocket. "But I'll have agents posted at the door. If she leaves the floor, she enters federal custody." He walked out, brushing past Sarah. He smelled like stale tobacco and gun oil. As soon as the door clicked shut, Ryan slumped in the chair, his strength evaporating. The monitor on his portable IV started beeping. "Get him back to bed," Sterling yelled, rushing to check the commander's pulse. Sarah dropped to her knees beside the wheelchair. She put her hand on Ryan's arm. "What did you mean? About Michael?" Ryan looked at her, his eyes glassy with pain and heavy sedation. He reached into the pocket of his hospital gown and pulled out a small, blood-stained dog tag. It wasn't his. He pressed it into Sarah's hand. "He didn't die in training, Sarah," Ryan whispered, struggling for air. "We were ambushed by our own support team. They wanted the K-9 training protocols sold to a private military contractor. Michael refused to sign off. They erased him." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. She clutched the dog tag. It was Michael's. She recognized the dent in the corner from when he'd dropped it on the garage floor years ago. "I took Gunner," Ryan wheezed. Gunnar was Michael's dog first, before he was mine. That's why he listened to you. He remembers you. He remembers the smell of your house." "Why are you here, Ryan?" she asked softly. "Because they missed me," Ryan said, his eyes closing as exhaustion took over. "And they know I have the proof. And they know you're the next leverage point." Sterling grabbed the handles of the wheelchair. "Enough talking. He's spiking a fever. We need to get him to isolation." Sarah stood up, wiping her face. "I'm coming with him." "Sarah, you can't," Sterling started. "I'm his primary nurse," she said, her voice hard. "And apparently I'm the target. I'm not leaving his side." The sun went down, and the storm that had been threatening the coast finally broke. Rain lashed against the glass walls of the ICU, blurring the city lights into smears of neon and grey. The hospital settled into the eerie quiet of the third shift. But on the fourth floor, the tension was electric. 2 agents stood guard outside room 402. Sarah sat inside, watching the vitals monitor. Ryan was asleep, finally resting after the exertion of the confrontation. But Sarah couldn't rest. She was replaying the last 4 years of her life. The silence from her brother, the closed casket funeral, the way her father had drank himself to death a year later, muttering about snakes in the garden. It all made sense now. The code wasn't just commands, it was a philosophy. The shepherd watches the night. It meant loyalty above survival. At 02:15, the lights in the hallway flickered. Sarah looked up. Hospital power grids were redundant. They didn't flicker. She walked to the door and peered out the small glass window. The 2 agents were there. One was checking his phone. The other was sipping coffee. Then the lights went out completely. The emergency red backup lights kicked on instantly, bathing the corridor in a blood-colored glow. Thump, thump, Sarah pressed her face to the glass. The 2 agents were on the floor. They hadn't been shot. There was no noise. They just dropped. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She spun around and locked the door. It was a flimsy hospital lock. It wouldn't stop anyone. She ran to the bedside. Ryan, wake up!" She shook him hard. He groaned, his eyes fluttering open. "They're here," she whispered. Ryan didn't ask who. He didn't ask how. The soldier in him woke up before the man did. He sat up, ripping the tape off his IV. "My gear," he rasped. "Confiscated," Sarah said. "We have nothing, just scalpels and—" She looked around. "And a bedpan." Ryan swung his legs over the edge of the bed. He was dizzy, swaying, but he forced himself to focus. The agents. Down. Silenced weapons or poison. I didn't hear a shot. "Cleaners," Ryan said. "Mercenaries. Pros." He looked at the door. "We need to move. This room is a coffin. It has only one exit." "Where do we go?" Sarah asked. "The elevators will be locked down." "The roof," Ryan said. "Or the basement. But we can't get there without a weapon." Suddenly, a low, distinctive sound echoed through the ventilation shaft above them. Woof! It was muffled, distant, but unmistakable. Ryan looked up, a grim smile touching his pale lips. "Or we get the weapon to come to us." "Gunnar?" Sarah asked. "He's at the base kennels. That's 10 miles away." "No," Ryan said. "I know the handler who picked him up. Sergeant Miller. No relation to you, just a coincidence. Tex. He wouldn't leave his battle buddy alone in a cage while I was in the ICU. He's close, probably sleeping in the parking lot truck." Ryan grabbed the bedside phone. Deadline. "Damn it," he hissed. The door handle to room 402 jiggled, slowly, quietly. Sarah grabbed a heavy oxygen tank from the corner. It weighed 20 pounds. She held it like a baseball bat. Ryan grabbed a scalpel from the bedside tray. He slid off the bed, standing on legs that shook violently. He leaned against the wall next to the door. "When they breach," Ryan whispered, "hit the first one high. I'll go low." "You can barely stand," Sarah hissed. "I don't need to stand to cut a femoral artery," he replied. The lock clicked. The door eased open. A figure stepped in, dressed in hospital scrubs but wearing tactical boots. He held a pistol with a suppressor. Sarah didn't hesitate. She swung the oxygen tank with every ounce of rage and fear in her body. Clang! The tank connected with the man's shoulder, shattering the clavicle. The gunman grunted and dropped to one knee, the gun clattering across the floor. Ryan lunged. He collapsed onto the man, driving the scalpel down. It wasn't a kill shot. He didn't have the angle, but he jammed it into the man's thigh. The assassin screamed, a sound that was shockingly loud in the quiet room. "Run!" Ryan shouted to Sarah. "Grab the gun!" Sarah scrambled across the floor. Her hands were slick with sweat. She grabbed the suppressed Glock. It was heavier than she expected. She pointed it at the door, just as a second shadow appeared. She pulled the trigger. She had never fired a gun in her life. The recoil surprised her, and the shot went wild, shattering the glass window of the ICU station. But it was enough. The second assassin ducked back into the hallway. Ryan rolled off the first attacker, who was now unconscious from the shock of the blow and the stab wound. Ryan grabbed the man's radio. "Tex!" Ryan screamed into the radio, hoping the frequency was standard open channel. "Tex! Trauma floor! Contact front! Bring the boy!" There was a burst of static, and then a voice that sounded like pure Texas gravel. "Wolf, hang tight, boss. We're in the elevator, and he is not happy." Ding! The elevator doors at the end of the hall dinged, a cheerful, polite sound in the middle of a war zone. The doors opened. 3 men in black tactical gear were waiting in the hallway, rifles raised, moving toward Ryan's room. They turned toward the elevator. From the darkness of the elevator car, a shadow launched itself. It was faster than a human, faster than thought. Gunner hit the lead assassin in the chest like a fur-covered missile. The impact knocked the man backward 5 feet. The man's rifle fired into the ceiling as Gunner clamped down on his tactical vest, shaking him like a rag doll. "Get 'em, boy!" Tex yelled, stepping out of the elevator with his own sidearm drawn, firing controlled shots at the other 2 mercenaries. The hallway erupted into chaos. Sarah helped Ryan up. "We have to go, now." "Not yet," Ryan said, grabbing the dropped pistol from the first assassin. He checked the chamber. "We fight our way to the dog." "You're crazy!" Sarah cried. "You're bleeding again!" Ryan looked at her. The blood was seeping through his gown, staining the blue fabric dark purple. But his eyes were clear. "The only way out is through them, Sarah. Stay on my 6. Hand on my shoulder. If I fall, you pick up the gun and you keep shooting." They stepped into the hallway. Gunner had finished with the first man and was now corralling the second, barking with a ferocity that shook the walls. The mercenary was backed into a corner, terrified to move. Tex, a burly man with a cowboy hat and a tactical vest, was exchanging fire with the third man who had taken cover behind the nurse's station. "Wolf!" Tex yelled. "Good to see you up. I brought your chewing toy." "Cover fire!" Ryan yelled, raising his pistol. He fired 2 shots, suppressing the man at the station. Sarah moved with him, her hand gripping the back of his gown. She felt the heat radiating off him. He was burning up, running on pure adrenaline. If they didn't get help soon, he would collapse, and this time, he wouldn't wake up. "Tex, secure the stairwell," Ryan ordered. "On it!" Tex whistled. "Gunner! Fass! Attack!" Gunner abandoned the terrified man in the corner and launched himself over the nurse's station counter. There was a scream, a crash of monitors, and then silence. Gunner popped his head up from behind the counter, panting, a piece of black tactical fabric in his teeth. Good boy, Sarah whispered, tears blurring her vision. They reached the stairwell door. Tex kicked it open. We go down, Tex said. I got a TAC vehicle at the loading dock, bulletproof glass. We get you to the secure safe house in Nevada. No, Ryan said, stopping. He leaned heavily against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. Ryan! Sarah knelt beside him. We can't go to Nevada, Ryan gasped. The leak. It came from high up. The safe houses are burned. If we go there, we die. Then where? Tex asked, reloading his magazine. We can't stay here. The cops are going to swarm this place, and the bad guys have friends. Ryan looked at Sarah. His vision was tunneling. The cabin, Sarah said suddenly. Both men looked at her. My father's cabin, Sarah said, her voice strengthening. In the Smoky Mountains. It's off the grid. No digital footprint. He built it for this exact scenario. He called it the Alamo. Ryan nodded weakly. Take us to the Alamo. His head lolled forward. He was out. Check his pulse, Tex barked. Sarah pressed her fingers to his neck. It's thready. He's tearing his internal sutures. We need to move him now, or he bleeds out in the van. Tex looked at the unconscious SEAL, then at the 100-pound dog standing guard over him, and finally at the rookie nurse. All right, ma'am, Tex said. You grab his feet. I got his shoulders. Gunner. Point. The dog turned, facing the dark, spiraling staircase leading down into the bowels of the hospital. He let out a low growl, sensing the path ahead. Lead the way, Sarah said. And together, the nurse, the cowboy, and the war dog carried the wounded soldier into the darkness, leaving the hospital and their old lives behind. The interstate dissolved into a blur of rain-slicked asphalt and passing headlights as Tex pushed the battered Ford F-150 to 90 miles per hour. The truck, a grey man vehicle designed to blend into construction sites and farm roads, was currently a mobile trauma unit. In the cramped back seat, Sarah was fighting a war on a different front. Hold the light steady, Sarah commanded, her voice cracking with exhaustion. Gunner sat on the floorboard, his heavy head resting on Sarah's knee, providing a strange, grounding comfort amidst the chaos. He whined softly, sensing the distress of the man lying across the bench seat. But he didn't move. He knew his job was to be still. Ryan Holloway was burning up. The makeshift travel from the hospital to the parking garage had torn 2 of his internal sutures. His abdomen was distended, rigid to the touch. He was bleeding internally, and the septic shock from the initial gut wounds was creeping back in. He's crashing again, Sarah shouted over the roar of the engine and the pounding rain. Tex, I need the kit, the red bag. Under the seat, Tex yelled, swerving around a semi-truck. Don't sugarcoat it, Bennett. Is he going to make it to Tennessee? Sarah grabbed the red tactical medical bag. She ripped it open, bypassing the bandages and going straight for the IV fluids and the heavy-duty antibiotics. If I don't stabilize this bleed, he won't make it to the state line, Sarah said grimly. She looked at Ryan. He was conscious, but barely. His skin was grey, clammy, and he was shivering violently. Leave me, Ryan whispered, his teeth chattering. Drop me at a vet clinic. Keep moving. Shut up, Commander, Sarah said, snapping a tourniquet around his arm to find a vein. You don't get to give orders back here. I outrank you in this seat. She managed to get a fresh IV line in. She pushed a bolus of fluids and a strong dose of morphine. Then she did something that made her hands shake. She took a staple gun from the kit, a sterile, field-grade skin stapler. This is going to hurt, she whispered. She cut away the blood-soaked bandages on his side. The wound was angry and weeping. Without hesitation, she pinched the skin together and fired 3 staples to close the dehiscence. Ryan arched his back, a guttural groan escaping his lips. But he didn't scream. He passed out from the pain. "He's out," Sarah said, checking his pulse. "It's weak, but he's holding." For the next 6 hours, time became a loop of checking vitals, pushing fluids, and watching the dark landscape roll by. Sarah didn't sleep. She couldn't. She spent the time looking at Gunnar, stroking his velvet ears, whispering the German commands her father had taught her so long ago. The shepherd watches the night. She finally understood why her father had been so hard on her, why he had insisted she learn to shoot, to track, to navigate without a GPS. He wasn't just being a paranoid soldier. He was preparing her for a war he knew was coming, a war that had claimed Michael and was now coming for her. "We're here," Tex announced, as the sun began to bleed over the horizon. The truck turned off the paved road onto a gravel track that wound its way up into the dense, misty forests of the Great Smoky Mountains. This was the Alamo. It wasn't a vacation cabin. It was a structure built of reinforced logs and stone, nestled against a sheer cliff face that protected its rear. The windows were narrow slits. The perimeter was cleared of brush for 50 yards, a standoff distance to prevent covert approaches. Tex killed the engine. The silence of the mountains was deafening after the roar of the highway. "Help me get him inside," Tex said. They carried Ryan into the main room. It smelled of cedar, dust, and gun oil, the smell of Sarah's childhood. She laid Ryan on the heavy oak table in the center of the room. It was the only surface clean enough to act as a bed. While Tex secured the perimeter, checking the hidden sensors her father had installed along the driveway, Sarah went to work setting up a field hospital. She found her father's generator in the cellar and fired it up. The lights flickered on. She raided the pantry. It was stocked. MREs, canned water, medical supplies, ammunition. Thomas Miller had died waiting for a siege that never came, leaving his daughter the keys to the castle. By noon, Ryan was stable. The fever had broken, thanks to the military-grade antibiotics in the cache. He was awake, sipping water, propped up against a mountain of pillows. Gunnar lay at the foot of the table, his eyes fixed on the front door. "Your father," Ryan rasped, looking around the fortified room, "was a paranoid genius." Sarah was cleaning a 12-gauge shotgun she had found in the gun rack. He was a terrified father. "There's a difference." "He knew," Ryan said, "about the unit, about the corruption. That's why he built this." Ryan tried to sit up, wincing. "The drive, Sarah, look in my boot, the left one." Sarah frowned, but moved to the pile of Ryan's bloody tactical gear. She picked up the left combat boot. The heel felt heavy. She pried off the rubber sole. Inside was a micro SD card wrapped in plastic. "That," Ryan said, "is everything." "Michael recorded the briefing where General Kincaid, Agent Graves's boss, authorized the sale of the K9 protocols to the cartel. It proves Michael wasn't the traitor. He was the whistleblower." Sarah held the tiny chip. It was so small, yet it weighed as much as her brother's life. "We need to upload this," Sarah said. "Send it to the press. To the FBI." "We can't," Tex said, walking in from the porch. He looked grim. "No internet up here, no cell service. That's the point of the Alamo. It's a dead zone." "Then we drive back to town," Sarah said. "Too late," Tex said. He walked to the window and pointed a pair of binoculars down the mountain. Sarah looked. Far down the winding gravel road, barely visible through the trees, was a glint of metal. Then another. And another. Black SUVs, moving slow. Tactical formation. "How did they find us?" Sarah whispered. "The truck," Ryan said, closing his eyes. "They didn't track the truck. They tracked the transponder in Gunnar." Sarah froze. She looked at the dog. "He has a subdermal chip," Ryan said. "Military standard, I thought it was inactive. They must have reactivated it remotely when we left the hospital. They used him, Sarah said, horror rising in her throat. They used him to lead them to us. Tex racked the slide of his AR-15. Well, they found us. Now they have to come and get us. Ryan swung his legs off the table. He was pale, sweating, and bleeding, but the look in his eyes was terrifying. He was no longer a patient. He was the wolf. Help me up, Ryan ordered, and give me a weapon. The sun dipped below the tree line, casting the mountain in long, bruising shadows. Down the hill, the black SUVs sat silent, waiting for nightfall. Inside the cabin, the mood was one of cold, calculated preparation. They had turned the Alamo into a kill zone. Ryan sat behind the overturned oak table, facing the front door, his M4 carbine resting on his lap. He was too weak to move fast, so he was the anchor. Tex was on the roof with a scoped rifle. Sarah was the rover, armed with her father's 12-gauge shotgun and a pouch of shells. They're moving. Tex's voice crackled over the radio. 8 heat signatures, splitting up, flanking maneuver. Hold fire until they cross the red line, Ryan ordered, his face pale but his eyes sharp. Gunner began to pace, a low, continuous growl rumbling in his chest. He moved to the back door, hackles raised. Crack. Tex fired from the roof. One down, taking heavy fire. The cabin erupted into chaos as bullets hammered the log walls. A flashbang grenade smashed through the front window, detonating with a blinding light. The front door was kicked in, and 2 men in tactical gear stormed the room. Ryan didn't flinch. He fired 2 controlled bursts, dropping both attackers instantly. Back door, Sarah screamed. The rear door splintered open. A massive man in body armor charged in. Sarah pumped the shotgun and fired, but the buckshot only staggered him against the frame. He raised his rifle, aiming at her center mass. Gunner, Fass! The Malinois launched himself. He didn't go for the limb. He went for the gap in the armor at the neck. The man screamed, dropping his rifle to grapple with the 100-pound animal. Sarah stepped forward, placed the muzzle against the man's unarmored thigh, and fired. The threat ended. They're in the kitchen, Tex yelled over the radio, panic in his voice. I'm hit. I'm pinned. Go, Sarah, Ryan roared, suppressing another target in the yard. Flank them. Sarah ran low through the hallway, Gunner limping at her heel. She reached the kitchen just as a mercenary climbed through the window. She raised the shotgun and pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. The mercenary grinned and raised his pistol. Sarah didn't have time to reload. She threw the heavy shotgun at him and dove. Gunner collided with the gunman, and they tumbled out the window into the muddy yard. Sarah scrambled to look out. The man had a knife. He brought it down hard. Gunner yelped, a sound that tore at Sarah's heart. But the dog didn't let go. He clamped onto the man's wrist, shattering the bone. Sarah grabbed a loose brick from the sill and dropped it on the mercenary's head with all her force. He went limp. Suddenly the shooting stopped. The silence was heavier than the gunfire. Tex, Sarah whispered into the radio. Static. The front door creaked. A figure stepped into the frame. Agent Silas Graves. He was calm, stepping over the bodies of his men. He held a pistol to the head of Tex, who was bloodied and bound. Game over, Graves announced. Ryan, out of ammunition, slowly lowered his rifle. Let him go. Drop the weapon, Commander, Graves commanded, or the cowboy dies. Ryan dropped the gun. Graves smiled, his eyes cold. Now give me the chip, and maybe I'll let you die quickly. You killed my brother, Sarah said, emerging from the hallway, Gunner limping beside her, bleeding from his shoulder. Your brother was a loose end, Graves sneered, just like the dog. He's going to be put down in about 10 seconds. Please, Sarah begged, dropping to her knees beside Gunner. She wrapped her arms around the dog's neck. Graves thought she was saying goodbye. She wasn't. She was positioning him. She buried her face in the dog's fur. "The shepherd watches the night," she whispered. Graves cocked his pistol. Enough melodrama. The chip. Now. Sarah looked up. Her tears were gone. "You forgot the second half of the code," she said softly. Graves frowned. "What?" Sarah looked at Gunnar. She felt his muscles coil like steel springs. She shouted the words that released the ultimate sanction, the kill order for a handler down. "But the wolf hunts the dawn!" Gunnar exploded into motion. He ignored the pain, ignored the blood. He covered the distance in a heartbeat. Graves panicked and fired blindly. The bullet grazed the dog's flank, but the momentum was unstoppable. Gunnar hit Graves in the chest, knocking him backward and away from Tex. Tex threw a shoulder check into the melee, knocking Graves's gun loose. It skittered across the floor to Sarah's feet. Sarah picked it up. Graves kicked Gunnar off and reached for a boot knife. He looked up to see Sarah standing over him, holding the pistol with a two-handed grip, just like her father had taught her. "This is for Michael," she said. She pulled the trigger. The silence that followed was absolute. The siege was over. The pack had survived. That is the incredible story of Sarah Bennett and the K9 hero, Gunnar. It reminds us that sometimes the strongest soldiers aren't the ones holding the guns, but the ones holding the hope. Sarah didn't just heal a wound. She healed a broken bond between a man and his dog, and in doing so, uncovered the truth about her own family. It's a powerful testament to the loyalty of military working dogs and the unseen sacrifices of the medical staff who fight to save our warriors. If you were in Sarah's shoes, facing a 100-pound war dog in a trauma bay, would you have stood your ground? Let me know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story about true heroism and survival. Share this video with a friend who loves dogs or military stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.